All right, so this one is for Catherine Mansfield and Miss Brill. So this one, was the last one for this week, and it's another modernist story. So that means that it takes place, or is written around the same time that Hemingway is writing. So let's get into this one. All right. So Catherine Mansfield was born in 1888, lived till 1923. She was a New Zealand writer and she was also a critic, and she was very important in the modernist movement. She's friends or was friends with D.H. Lawrence, Virginia Woolf, and other modernist writers. And we're going to look at one of Virginia Woolf's stories next week. So uh these again, I had talked about in the Hemingway video that for the modernist writers, this is, a time period that they are focusing on the turn of this century, and the changes, the fact that we go quickly from electricity and all of the advances in technology, as well as to changing world shifting politics and geography and different issues. Obviously, she lives during World War One. So there's a lot of different things that modernist writers focus on. They also have a lot of unique techniques. Definitely a lot more flowery language again. Um, and what can they do with writing? How can they keep it fancy and educated, not just for anybody who may be writing, but also very interesting techniques. And one of which we see in this story is the idea of stream of consciousness writing, which we'll get into a bit more with the story itself. But it was this idea that, when we are thinking, we don't usually have the edited, streamlined process of thoughts that we often see characters go through in books. A lot of the times, our thoughts are, we have one thought leading to another. It's not edited and perfect. And that's even if you don't have, people who have their thoughts race or are jumbled and confused. I know, for example, my husband has ADHD, so he always jokes about the fact of that it's a mind gallop to sometimes the different thoughts and his we have to trace the pathway of how he gets from one thought to another. So with stream of consciousness writing, we're really seeing as the characters have these thoughts and are expressing them. And so with a lot of the modernist writers, it's very popular to do first person narratives so that way we can really see through the mind of the character. Now, Mansfield was diagnosed with pulmonary tuberculosis in 1917. She died in France at age 34. So she definitely was one of those who had a lot more writing in her that was unfortunately cut short. And again, we talked about with Poe that pulmonary tuberculosis was it is a disease that affects the lungs. It is a bacterial disease, and it's not like we don't still have it today. It's just we have better preventative treatment. We understand how it works. We're much better able to treat it when it does happen. So it's not the same prognosis as it was earlier in history. But we don't start getting those better treatments and more guaranteed treatments and prevention until post 1920s. So unfortunately, she died before they started having improvements in the treatment. Now, socially, she grew up in a prominent family. Her father was a chairman of the Bank of New Zealand. He was eventually knighted in 1923, the year that she passed. So she grew up in basically a very well-to-do family in New Zealand. She first formally started publishing stories in 1900. The first one was His Little Friend, which she published in the New Zealand Graphic and Ladies Journal. And then after that, she decided to go to school. So she moved to London because a lot of times um, writers in, you know, for lack of a better term, the colonies or of the empire, whether that be area, any areas around the world, they would often go to London to get the best schooling. So she goes and she attends Queen's College, and she was originally going to take up the cello professionally, but she got interested in the college newspaper. She became the editor and decided to focus on writing. And she was very interested in the works of Oscar Wilde. We will look at a piece of one of his works in the drama section, The Importance of Being Earnest. But also the symbolist writers, specifically the French symbolist writers. So these ones focus on, kind of as the name suggests, this idea of symbolism in everything and how can we use it. She returned to New Zealand after school. She became a writer in earnest. She had several works published in Australia in the Native Companion, and she wanted to become a professional writer and kind of improve not just her writing, but get more of her works out there. Now, she had a very difficult personal life. She had two romantic relationships with women. Though she did try to repress her feelings, she did occasionally take male lovers. So, we would say she is um, bisexual, but it could also have been that those, um, her attempts to have male lovers were attempts to stay in society's expectations. Um Now, this is a time period that in many places across the world it is still illegal to be gay. More famously, men are the ones who we can see go through trials, which we'll talk about with Oscar Wilde. If we look at even Alan Turing during World War II, facing criminal charges for being gay. So, not saying it didn't happen to women who were gay, but this is not a safe time period. But it's not like people weren't gay. They just usually had to hide it a lot more. Now, she did eventually have a love affair with Garnet Trowell. She became pregnant by him, and his parents disapproved of the relationship. So even though, if we go back to like Victorian style, like we might see in Bridgerton of the, oh my goodness, you ruined her honor, you must marry her, because they disapproved of the relationship, she was going, they wouldn't allow him to marry her. So she hastily enters into a marriage with George Bowden, but she refused to consummate the marriage. So it was enough of, um, that she knew she was pregnant. He probably did not know at the time. So it would be one of those instances of, you get married quickly. So that way, oh, look, I'm pregnant. And, the man would never potentially know it wasn't his. They could have been not a trick, though. He might have known and still been willing to marry her. There's a lot of different things it could be. But she refused to consummate the marriage. She did not want to be with Bowden. It was a relationship that her parents tried to put through. So because, being a unwed mother, considering her social status, was practically, social isolation. No, the chance that nobody would be willing to take her on as wife. What is that going to do for her social prospects? How is she going to live? Especially this isn't a time period. She wants to be a writer, but this isn't a time period that someone could, as a woman, easily, go out and make a lot of money and support themselves and a child, just on writing you know so the marriage was eventually annulled because it was never consummated. And Mansfield's mother sent her away to a town, kind of away from everyone else in society, figuring maybe she'd cool down. Maybe the marriage with Bowden didn't work because Mansfield was in a lesbian relationship with another woman, a lot of different things. And just from all the stress of everything going on, while in this town away from everyone, Mansfield miscarried. She did take another female lover for a while, and then she began a relationship with John Middleton Murray. He was the Rhythm magazine editor, and originally, when she would submit stories original stories of her own to the magazine, he would reject them. This is obviously before the relationship, and he wanted something darker. He wanted, I don't know if it was that he saw something in her and wanted to encourage her, or just doubted that a woman could write something darker. So she does. She eventually produces the murder story, The Woman at the Store, and she is able to get it published. They start their relationship. We'll go into their marriage later, but she does eventually marry him, but she leaves him twice. One thing that's happening throughout all this is that her brother is killed during World War I, and then shortly after, she is diagnosed with tuberculosis, and that is when her health begins to deteriorate. So during this time period, kind of the live in the day, seize the moment type idea of, well, I have to, take what time I have. She finally gets an official divorce, gets the marriage annulled from Bowden, and that allows her to marry Murray. But then her and Murray split. During their relationship, she had affairs with other men and more so women, but they eventually come together again, and he is with her to the end of her life. And because of, again, that we don't have cures, we don't have a lot of understanding of tuberculosis at the time, she starts to seek whatever cures she can find, whatever new science, whatever experimental, even unorthodox, untested treatments she can find, trying to extend her life, and unfortunately doesn't work. So it's a very difficult personal life. So we have her story, Miss Brill. This is one of her most often studied stories. It was first published in 1920, first in the Athenaeum, and later in the Garden Party and Other Stories. This one, it obviously this is during her tuberculosis treatments. So a lot of people focus on the fact that it is a kind of a sad story. We're seeing this woman who definitely is not happy with her life. She is not able to really communicate with others, to really connect with others. She is very much stuck on the fringes of society, unable to participate, which causes some isolation. Now, we can't really tell from this whether it's self-isolation or isolation by society. It could be a mixture of both. Um, and we do have the fact, again, it is very, it's sad the way it ends, that she is ridiculed and mocked, and that causes her to retreat to her isolationism and be upset. Um, but it really represents, what is it like to be someone who isn't a part of society? What are the effects of isolationism on a person? And it's very much a part of the modernist genre. We do have also part of the modernist genre is a lot of emerging critiques on industrialism. So by now we have enough of the Industrial Revolution going on that we start to recognize some of the harms of it, and especially focusing on not just things like pollution, but we talked before about the advancement of technology. How do we keep up with it all? The difficulties of factories, and child labor issues. There's also the not quite as much about environmentalism yet, but very much of people being tired of the overcrowded and polluted cities and wanting to not quite go out into untamed nature, more the like tamed, calmer countryside. And like I said before, this idea of famous stream of consciousness writing, which we do see Miss Brill, our character, going through. So we can really see her thoughts, see everything going through. Now, obviously, because it is first person, that leads us to question whether this story, we can trust everything that's going on. We do see, obviously, she's visualizing herself as more a part of society through points. She's kind of fantasizing in her daydreams, especially when she's, thinking about playing with the band. And so, but there's nothing really that suggests that, it's not like Telltale Heart where we can see that the character has some kind of mental illness. We are not seeing that she's potentially lying to us to make herself look better. So, for the most part, yes, there's questions of whether she is an unreliable narrator because her versions of reality are tinted by the fact that she lives in this fantasy world in her mind and doesn't always face reality and maybe doesn't know how to face reality. Um, so that kind of goes into the tone and the mood, very much of this tone and mood being very similar. This, we feel pity for her. The setting itself, so it says the Jardin Public. This lets us know that it is in France because that is French for public gardens. So this idea, the public gardens, this is where today you can still go through the public gardens in Paris. They are highly cultivated, beautiful gardens. They have, it's kind of like a park. Um, I don't know of any in Highlands because I don't know Highlands well enough, but I'm sure there are plenty of nice parks that you could go to. The one that goes to my mind immediately, I'm live more in Polk County, is Lakeland Hollis Gardens. So the fact that they have an area where they have a playground and they have the public gardens you can walk through. They're highly cultivated and beautiful, and you can sit and rest by the gardens. They have music, they have all kinds of different things. That's kind of what I picture with this setting. Um, it's probably set in the early 1900s. And again, we know geographically it's France. Now, for Miss Brill's character, obviously all we know about her is what she herself tells us and what we see through her mind, how she interacts with others in her mind versus how she interacts with others in reality. So the fact that she is called Miss Brill, we don't know her first name throughout the entire story. We know the Miss, this idea of, technically a title, not like a aristocratic title, obviously, not even necessarily to the point like in A Rose for Emily where they called her Miss Emily. Not really necessarily a that she's a high part of society. She may have once been, and we'll get to that in a minute, but we know that by the title Miss, she is unmarried. We know that she says herself she is a school teacher. So that leads to a lot of different things. She could have come from a poorer family, but was able to at least become a school teacher. And that allows her, not necessarily more status in society maybe than she had before. She's certainly not going to be of the upper elites. But clearly she wants to be part of society. She's out there, but she doesn't know how to interact and really be part of society. Um, Another thing that could be a potential interpretation of her character is that young women, still in this time period, who did not secure a good marriage match before becoming what they call, a spinster. This idea that you're, unwed and you're older now, and the older you get, the less likely it is, your prospects go down. And this is, the age of spinsterness is absolutely ridiculous. When you look at 1800s and 1900s, 1700s, etc. So the idea that if you're over 24, you're definitely a spinster would be more the 1900s idea. And for some women, even if they were of high class society, um, what's going to happen to you when your parents are gone? You're not going to, daughters could not inherit their father's wealth and property. And if they don't have a husband to go to, they will eventually not be able to be cared for. So oftentimes, these women would have to get a job as a teacher or a governess, so that way they could support themselves if they could not obtain a match, and maybe they eventually obtain a match, maybe not of their original society status, who knows. Um, you also have orphans oftentimes would have to do that. So there's a lot of different reasons she could have become a teacher. But obviously we know that she's a teacher. We know that she is unwed, and we know that she clearly has issues with connecting with people because she's in the garden. She's at least being in society. It's not like she's trying to isolate herself, but she's not really talking to anyone. She is in her mind. She's imagining herself being part of the band and people enjoying her company and being around her. And so it's definitely a wish to be part of society. But we don't know, again, is this her holding herself back? Is it that she doesn't know how to be part of society? Or is it that others don't accept her as part of society? We see that two different generations of people in the story who are around her in real life. And the older couple kind of ignores her. They're not talking directly to her, and they're conversing with each other, and they have on more finery and nicer clothes. And it could be because she's in between those generations and she's unwed. It could be her social status. We don't know. Obviously, the young kids we see they're just mean to her. And again, we have to take this, is this, she hears them talking and making insults. They don't actually, officially talk to her sometimes, and yet she assumes that it's about her. So again, we have to take this, is this real life? Is this her intrusive thoughts coming in and ruining her um fantasy? Is this actually happening? There's a lot of things we don't know. Um, there are some elements of foreshadowing for some people. The fact that, she's there by herself. She's really, she's observing, she's watching conversations, but not taking part of them. There's a lot that we can go with from there. All right. Some themes, definitely loneliness and alienation. We can tell Miss Brill is lonely. Again, like I've said, she wanted to be part of society. And, what are the effects of loneliness on people and alienation? We see that she, goes back and she locks up her first stole, and she's very upset by what has happened. So we don't know, obviously, what happens after this. Does she ever try again? Does she just go to work, deal with students who obviously she can't connect to, and then, go home and never have anyone again? Does she, try again to put herself out there? We don't know, but we know the effects of loneliness and alienation are not good. This idea of versions of reality and delusion, it's not a it's not the medical term for delusion that I'm talking about here, because we don't think that she's necessarily hallucinating and being delusional of, imagining she's more worthy to society, and has a higher, not worthy to society, more of a higher place in society, is what I meant to say, than she really has. This could be just, daydreaming. What would it be like? We all have those moments where those thoughts cross our mind of what would it be like to be famous? And not just famous, like worldwide famous, but what would it be like to be known for something? What would it be like for, you go somewhere and people are, they know you immediately and they're happy to see you. So even if you know a lot of people and you're friends with a lot of people and you don't deal with this loneliness and alienation, I'm sure we all have these thoughts occasionally cross our mind of, well, what if, yeah, I've heard of people, online talking about, going to concerts, and they all get this weird thought in their head of, because occasionally once in a while the artist will bring people up on stage, like, what if I got picked to, and I know all this song lyrics and things like that. So it's not that we're deluded when we're thinking that way. It's, it's part of how our brain processes as part of fantasy and all of that, and processes what would we do in that situation. Definitely a major theme of connectedness. How is it important? What does it mean to be connected? And also this kind of contrast between youth and age. She's not very old. She's, probably somewhere between 20s and 30s. She's obviously older than the young kids who make fun of her, older than her students that she can't really relate to and connect with, but she's not quite as old to be able to connect with the older couple who are talking in the garden. For symbolism and illusion, one thing, that a lot of the garments that are discussed, in this story, she has a fur stole, which is a not like a scarf. That's kind of how it would be worn, but it's not thin like a scarf. And obviously, it was made of fur, and hers specifically is made of mink, which is a type of animal related to a weasel. We also see the older gentleman that she's observing. He is wearing a full fur coat. So these garments do suggest um, a sense of wealth in society. So, especially thinking about the older man, it's a well kept fur coat. So that means that it's potentially, it may not be new, but at least he's able to take care of it well. And this is something, you had to get them dry cleaned. But they had to be done under very special circumstances. I know my grandfather, his father, was a dry cleaner in the early 1900s, and into the 1930s and 40s. And when my grandfather trained under him to help out in the shop, my grandpa said about how you had to check when a fur clothing item came in, because if it was real fur, you couldn't use the same chemicals and processes on it or you would ruin it versus the fake fur. And, even, the fake fur was not necessarily cheap, but obviously the real fur by this time is already, it's a luxury item. We often look at the fur trade as, well, yeah, especially in the 1800s, well, that's how you made clothes, is you would use all the parts of the animal that you would hunt down. Obviously, some people know about the problems environmentally with, such as the hunting of the sea otters for hats, because they have very, very soft fur that is water repellent and um really good against cold. So the fact that it made great hats, unfortunately, almost wiped out the sea otters in the Northwest in through California, and there's still uh over 100 years later, populations are still trying to recover. So it's not like there wasn't fur everywhere, and they had fur farms in addition to um hunting for fur and meat and all of that. And today we still see those items as expensive because they are rare. Now they're more rare today and expensive today because of shifting societies. Fur fell out of fashion. We also looked at the cruelty of it and the environmental cost of it to species. So it's a lot different today that more people would use fake fur. But into the 1930s, 40s, I know, again, my grandfather, he said when, I think it was in the 1950s, either 40s or 50s, when his father was able to make enough money to afford to get my great grandmother a fur coat. And that was one of her treasured possessions because it was a sign of status and luxury. It was, my husband and I own businesses and we're doing well enough in a small town with our businesses to afford this luxury item of status, even though we didn't come from much. So fur coats are a big deal. Now, if we compare the fur coat the old man is wearing to the fur stole that Miss Brill is wearing, we can see hers is not as well kept It's kind of ratty, it's kind of musty. That could be because she hasn't been able to afford to care for it the same way that it needs to. It could be that it's a heirloom item that has been passed down um in the family, so suggesting maybe at one point her family had wealth or she herself had wealth. There's a lot of things we don't know about it, but the fur definitely this representative of society. But we can also see she kind of anthropomorphizes it. Um, and this works more with stoles than coats, that sometimes fur items were made with part of it wasn't just like the fur itself. Like sometimes they would keep part of the pelt, like the feet and the head. Obviously not with the skull and all that, but they would keep part of the pelt, part of the garment. So some items are easier to anthropomorphize than others. So hers probably still has the face of the mink itself as part of this, again, scarf-like item that she's wearing. So it's easy to kind of picture it as this creature that keeps her company while she is isolated. And we can see, especially at the end of the story, when she, puts it away and we hear this kind of whimpering cry, we're looking at it again through her point of view. And so it's kind of, at this point, it's very biased because it's most likely that she is upset and crying at this point, but it also makes it sound like it is the stole that is crying at this point. Now the couple, the older, they're not couple as in like together, married, they could be just people who are talking to each other. But they're talking about this fried whiting. Whiting is a type of fish. It was a common type fish, so not very expensive. And, the idea of fried fish rather than like baked or steamed was usually the more cheap item. So again, we get this disconnect of, are these people she's around really high society just because they're wearing these fancier garments, but they're talking about common everyday, meals that commoners, for lack of a better term, would eat. We don't know. So there could be this idea of status, again, appearances versus reality. What is social status? What does it matter that one person, it doesn't matter how, we're all human in the end. Yes, obviously money makes things easier for some people than others about life. We can see that all the time. But there are things that we can still relate to in some ways as the human experience. And this idea of, oh, well, you can't talk to me because you're beneath me in social status is ridiculous when people can easily talk to each other about many different things. We also get this idea, especially from the fact of Miss Brill thinking about herself being on stage, this reference to one of Shakespeare's plays, where the common phrase, all the world's a stage, comes from. And it's this idea that when we are in society, we are always putting on a mask. Whether you're neurodivergent or neurotypical, we all put on a mask because who we are with our family is different than who we are with our friends, is different than who we are with our bosses and professors and different things. So we're not, we always show different sides of ourselves, and but we have to remember we're always on stage, we're always playing a part. So we often, very much throughout society, have always paid attention to, if I'm out in public, what am I putting my best foot forward? We're always caring about appearances, because it matters. And we think of, well, I'm unique. It doesn't matter what people think of me. But if we go back again to our kind of our mammalian brain, we are still an animal, and we go back even to caveman days, the idea that we have always had to work together. We are a social species. We do not do well on our own. We need others, even in modern society, to get ahead in life, that working together is how we get ahead, not working by ourselves. So even though we think, "Oh, well, I don't care what other think, I'm my unique individual self," oftentimes on a subconscious level, we still need to fit in. We still need care about what other people think because that's how we get ahead is if we fit in. So this idea of what part are we playing on this stage of life is very important. Uh, and kind of something that's always in the back of anyone's mind that helps with being able to be connected to society and being able to not be isolated and alienated. Um, I'm sure there's probably some, thinking of it now, there's probably and I don't know about the research into the story that anyone's written about it yet, but I'm sure modern takes could argue too about the differences of masking if you are neurodivergent. The fact that oftentimes it's more common for a neurodivergent person to mask, especially women, to fit in with society even when they really feel like they don't. So I'm sure there could be some new historical critique on, how would that change our story, if we thought of Miss Brill as being neurodivergent character and, kind of outside of society's norms. So that's just food for thought to think about. Let me see. I believe that's everything. Yes. So that will finish up Miss Brill. So make sure to go through the study guide posted on Brightspace for the exam. And you can take notes on it and use those notes to help you study, as well as take notes, especially answering the questions on the study guide. You can use those notes on the exam itself. So that it will help you. And I'll post an announcement kind of going over the structure of the exam so that everyone knows what to do, and we'll go from there. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out.